Welcome back. Today we are in discussion about organizing the ego. What is the ego for? What is its purpose? The ego is here to ask questions of ourselves about who we are. Very simply put, the ego is our sense of self-awareness. The ego is our sense of self-importance. The ego fact checks against reality. It is the part of us that questions. That's how I see it. And a lot of people like to demonize the ego because they say that it creates distorted senses of self. It creates the parts of us that react with high emotion, that become narcissistic, that create an inflated sense of self, that can't see its connection to others, that doesn't have the ability to develop compassion, is inhumane, etc., etc. I don't believe that. I believe that the ego serves a very simple function in our system. And as I mentioned, that function is to understand who it is and how it is different from everything else. It's our relationship to our own individuality. And to me, that is a really powerful and important thing. I'm very grateful that I can see who I am. I'm grateful that I can see who I am not. I am grateful that I can see myself as separate from other people in reality. And I think that when we have a distorted relationship to our ego, meaning that we don't understand the function that it serves in our system and we don't know how to use it, that it not only is obvious that within an improper relationship to ego would come improper or unhelpful definitions of self, but I also see the opportunity of organizing the ego to know thyself, right? As a result, step into a clean and empowered identity. So for me, ego is appreciated. For me, ego is respected. And it is something that I have done a lot of work and feel very passionate about. There's like a topic that I feel like is a bit of my axe to grind. And it's something that I feel really compelled to speak up about because I think that people are really missing an opportunity here when they choose to demonize aspects of their ego without seeing what it actually does for them. It, to me, makes absolutely no sense. So in today's training, when talking about organizing the ego, we're just going to simply look at why does the ego create distortion? It creates distortion when it looks at distortion. And external reality constructs, these kind of default programs, or the 3 programs that we spoke about in level 3, shapes of reality. If it looks at a distorted sense of self, if it looks at for example, the performance program that we talked about, comparing itself against other people to determine whether it wins or it loses, or whether it's happy, or whether it is successful in its ability to attempt to create the reality and the life that it wants to experience, coming from a soul blueprint perspective, coming from the deep desires of the individual self. If it looks at an external program that is inaccurate, then it is only going to create inaccurate information. It has a very simple function in our system. Our ability to look at what we see and desire a mirror so that we can ask ourselves, who am I? Who am I in this situation? And is what I see in the external reality that's being mirrored back to me or modeled back to me, is that accurate? Is that accurate in contrast to who I am? And quite often what we find is the answer is no, but society tells us the answer is supposed to be yes. And that is what creates distortion. So when you clean up your awareness of those shapes of reality, of those external reality programs, or those default programs that are in operation telling us that we should be existing in a certain way, and we internally do not feel that to be true. When we clean that up, then we actually get to the position where we start to be able to organize the ego to be answering questions the primary function of that self-questioning to get accurate information, to get corrected information. What happens when you do that is you do not respond to those situations of external awareness with frustration. You do not create shame. You do not create a sense of failure in yourself. You do not create brokenness. You don't make it about you. You don't define your success and your failure based on what you see in the external. So what happens with the ego is that it gets to the point when you correct it and organize it that it stops using that external orientation as the mirror. Kind of turns itself around. If you see it as like it was in this inverted position of awareness, it corrects itself. It starts to ask these questions that allow us these same questions that it's going to ask, that it's always going to ask, regardless of whether or not you like that, whether you agree with that, whether or not you're somebody who believes that we should just buy into the all is one, universal oneness. There is no separation between me and them. We are all love bullshit. First of all, you get to the place where you start to study your own depth, and your own depth becomes the mirror for that self-questioning, for that function of the ego, for that desire to see its individuality. And you see it from a position of power. You see it from a position of understanding this is how my relationship to reality was constructed up until this point. I understand that because I'm aware of these shapes of reality, because I'm aware that there is and was a power hierarchy or a power program that I was enrolled in that allowed me to and crafted my relationship to a sense of home, belonging, and individual value in myself. I understand that I went through that. I understand that I was programmed inside of that. It makes sense as to why I have had the type of thinking that I've had and the type of emotional reactions that I've had and the type of internal self-judgment that I've had from now up until this point. It makes a lot of sense to me now. It was inaccurate, but I don't need to suffer the nuances, the minutiae of those beliefs anymore and weed through and pick through and analyze all the ways that it created different variations and personas of me, because I understand that it is just distorted. Going back to what I said in the beginning of this training, if you feed the ego, if you feed your data processing center distorted information, it will create more distortion. So going down that track, like trying to analyze a viewpoint of self-awareness from a position of understanding a formula, a template, a program that is not accurate, will not change anything about what you understand about yourself. Your system is always going to ask you, who am I? Know thyself. Is who I believe that I am, is my individual state of conscious awareness, is it true in relationship to the all? This is the paradox. And when I said a few moments ago, and when I was talking about the all is one, there is no separation BS, a really powerful metaphor that I like to share is the analogy of the ocean and a glass of water. So if you have the ocean and you say that the ocean is the all is one, the universal consciousness, the waters of consciousness, the everything, right? And then you have a glass of water and you look at that glass of water and you ask yourself, is that glass of water different than the ocean? Is it the same and separate? The answer is yes. So is the water in the glass made up of the same material as the ocean? Of course it is. But is it contained? Is it its own ecosystem? Is it its own thing? And the answer to that is also yes. So what we need to accept and focus on is our own glass of water, our own piece of the pie. It doesn't mean that we are not a part of everything, but it also means that if you are an individual and you deny your ability to connect to and explore that individuality, then you've wasted the opportunity to understand how deep the waters go in yourself and the rules that apply to the all. What's happening in the ocean is not relevant to your experience inside of that contained individual reality. It influences, but you can build your own universe inside of that individual container. So you want the ego to ask these questions. You want to be able to understand who you are and who you are not. The whole thing that we're leading up to inside of this work is a comprehensive understanding of what it takes to get into a position inside of yourself where you not only know the components that make up the relationship to the whole, but how to be a part of all of them. So organizing the ego starts with understanding how it functions. The next step is to accept it and to stop making it wrong, to actually be grateful for its influence in your life, and then to clean up your distorted relationship to self-identity in all of the ways that you have related to defining who you are and creating persona over the years because of our inability to see the external distortion or the external programs or the external constructs for what they were. What you will find is when you start to work with the operating system sequence in that upgrade and you decide how information starts running through your system, then you do the work to recode or reprogram the fear mind, is that you don't actually react with an inflated ego or emotional pain or emotional distortion. You don't react to situations and become triggered in the ways that you used to. There's just nothing to react to because you become so rooted in your own clarity that there is nothing to trigger the alchemy. Now, there's always a next level, and no matter how much work we do, we always end up hitting another edge inside of us, hitting another edge to break through. You will end up getting to this point where, yeah, you're going to bump up against things as you move down the path of this work, but it will not have the same type of reaction in you. And what I have also found, and this is my personal experience, is that the more I have done this work religiously, and I'm talking specifically about the operating system upgrade, the less I have anxiety. So this is a huge one for me. I have no physical symptoms of anxiety anymore. And I used to live with daily anxiety, like a low level, just a constant buzz of anxiety in my system from morning until night. And it wasn't ever so much that I couldn't deal. It wasn't debilitating, but I was definitely aware of it. It felt like having just like tiny little headache in the overall description of how I felt about my day. Just like this little thing kind of scratching at the surface. I didn't have a sense of trust and faith and ease, like true peace in my system. So the more that I work religiously with the divine operating system, I ended up getting to the point where I have absolutely no anxiety at all. I see this as the corrected ego, because if the system is consistently asking this question and you don't have an answer for it. And if you don't have an answer for it, that is true. And if your answers are partially true and then mostly based on the limited aspects of yourself, the question that is being asked is not being answered correctly. The corrected ego understands that you have the power to create the reality that you desire to create. The corrected ego understands that you have the tools in your system to see yourself truly when you go inside instead of outside. The corrected ego understands that high vibrational emotion feeds and fuels the system as a source of pure and regenerative, high value fuel, high value energy. The corrected ego understands itself as the miracle. It understands itself as the paradox, and it does not suffer the separation like a lot of people would like you, or not people would like you to, but a lot of the ways that people think about things would impose. The corrected ego is not emotionally dependent on other people to feel seen, to feel recognized, to feel loved, to feel empowered. The corrected ego does not look at information that is distorted and attempt to process it. It sees it for what it is because it knows who it is. And that is a totally different game. That is a totally, that is living on a different frequency, 100%. And so that is why this is so important. It is not implying that you should be and live from the mind. It is not implying that higher intelligence is the entirety of the puzzle. What I'm saying is that the heart and mind cohesion is the place where you want to end up. When you organize the ego, when you correct your thought systems, when you have access to high quality thinking, you stop processing, you stop thinking, and what you have space for is feeling. But feeling emotions that are genuine reactions to the truth of your experience. Emotions that are true to who you are at the core of your heart and soul, instead of emotions that are reacting to distortions. Can you see how this is really, really different? So the work inside of the divine operating system and the work that we are talking about here in multidimensional databases or data systems is extremely important. You cannot expect to have a clean, pure results of information that comes your way if you don't have a clean and pure relationship to understanding what that is in the first place. So this is one very important aspect of that. And I hope you enjoyed this training, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.